Hi, I'd like to start off by thanking the organisers for inviting me again from Holland, to Holland from England. It's nice that you've arranged for the sun to be out as well. Not something I see that often. So just a little bit about me, just in case you don't know who I am. I'm one of the original co-founders of Joomla. I'm not directly involved anymore with Joomla. I spend most of my time doing consultancy and training in the UK. In fact, next week I'm off to do a Joomla installation and training for the Scottish Government, who are using Joomla and Docman. And interestingly, they're not bothered about ACL. So the whole idea that large corporates need ACL, not always that convinced. I also write a blog. It's an easy one to remember. It's brian.teeman.net. There's the tagline on it: agree or disagree, I don't care. And I try to not write the usual sort of things about today I went to, but to write some things about Joomla and just general websites that I think are important for you to know. And if you like them, great. And if you don't, who cares? So obviously the last few days have been a little bit interesting. We've had a lot of volcano activity. And for quite a while it looked like I wasn't going to get here. We looked at trains, boats. I even have a friend who's got a small plane license who offered to fly me here. And I said I wasn't going to get in a plane with him going through a volcano. I've seen the way he writes code. I'm definitely not going to trust him to take me in a plane. So after a lot of trouble, obviously in the end, found an empty airport and I got here. So Today's talk is about why is it called Joomla, how did we get the name, what else could it have been, what were the short runners. So if we take ourselves back in time to August the 17th, 2005, and 22 of us who were the core team of Mambo packed our bags, wrote a letter, and moved. And initially, we had to quickly set up a website called opensourcematters.org, but we knew that the new Mambo could never be called Open Source Matters. That wouldn't make sense. So in-house, we banned the word Mambo. It also didn't help that we had a legal threat that we ever use the word Mambo again, and we didn't want that. So internally, we called our new CMS the Spork. It's not a fork, and it's not a spoon, it's a spork. But I can't really see you guys going out there and selling your website services as the spork. So one thing you have to remember, there were 22 of us on the core team in those days, and we were distributed around the world. There were 3 in Australia, 3 in America, 2 in Canada, and everybody else was in Europe. Now this is before Skype. We had an IRC chat room and a mailing list. Can you imagine trying to communicate across all those time zones at once? Now, we regularly had meetings. I was lucky at the time. I had a telephone that gave me free phone calls to Australia and America. So what I would do is in the morning, I would telephone Australia, wake up Andrew just as he'd gone to bed, because I always got it just wrong. And we discussed the previous day's IRC chat and where we were going and what needed to be done. And then 6 hours later, I'd ring New York and wake Mitch up, because he hadn't had his breakfast yet. And I'd tell Mitch what Andrew and I had discussed and what had happened in the chat whilst he'd been asleep. And we'd take it a bit further. And then a bit later on, Mitch would talk to Andrew whilst I was asleep. And then I'd wake up. And it was just a never-going cycle. Now, there's just a photo of some of us on the team in those days. This was taken just in October 2005. This was the first time we'd ever met. In fact, this was the first time that there'd ever been more than 3 of the core team in the same country at one time. Never mind in the same place, seeing each other. So it was definitely a different experience. But splitting forming a new CMS, a new project, we knew there was a long road ahead. And not going to be an easy road. But we had to do a lot of things very, very quickly. And obviously, the first thing we had to do was come up with a new name. We realized there were 4 rules we needed for the new name. It had to be easy to remember and spell. The top-level domains all had to be available, the .com, the .net, and the .org. And in fact, at one point, we'd all agreed on a name. And that name was Jazzy. And Jazzy CMS was registered, Jazzy templates, Jazzy hosting, all sorts of Jazzy domains, and Jazzy.org. But we couldn't get Jazzy.com. Somebody else had registered it in America. No website, so someone was given the task of finding their telephone number and ringing them up and offering them 2 packets of crisps and a beer for the domain name. But it never happened. So Jazzy went out the window. The other thing we realized is that nobody else could be using it. One of the other popular suggestions of the time was Open Bongo. I'd completely forgotten about that when Johan reminded me about it earlier. But unfortunately, there was a Java project, I think it was, called Bongo. So Open Bongo had gone. Yeah. The other thing we were sort of aware about, when we were Mambo, we had a problem that there was a company who sold surferwear, beachwear, called Mambo Clothing. Now, actually, they went bust last week, which was a bit annoying because I bought some shares in the company so that I could say I finally owned Mambo. Those shares are just a piece of paper now. But one of the problems with that was that they would never allow us to do a Mambo T-shirt. I had long discussions in Australia. It was an Australian company. I had long phone calls with them saying, please, we only want to sell a T-shirt with an orange asterisk on it. It's not your surferwear. No. So one of the other rules was no trademarks, no copyright claims or anything like that. And we wanted to have some sort of a sensible meaning. So we were all sitting there in our IRC, throwing out names, writing them on a wiki, which has since unfortunately been lost, and coming up with names. And for every name someone suggested, 3 people would disagree. 22 people in the room, 25 different arguments. So we had to go further and needed some help. So on August the 19th, Andrew Eddy posted on our new forum, said we need help with the name. We're not going to accept necessarily the name you come up with, but give us some ideas. And we gave sort of 4 suggestions, what we were looking for. The first was a recursive acronym. I'll explain what that one is a bit later. Then there was something based on a phoenix, rising from the death, a new flame of light. CMS Blur, or Blur CMS. That was really popular. Or the other thing we were really proud of in those days was that Mambo was the first CMS that was really available in lots of different languages. So maybe we could do something with the name about those languages. So the recursive acronym, this was my favorite idea. So it's where you use the initials, and then the first word of the explanation of those initials is the acronym itself. So GNU's not Unix, PHP hypertext preprocessor, Wine is not an emulator, and Nagios ain't going to insist on sainthood. That was my favorite concept for coming up with a name. But I wasn't creative enough to actually come up with a name that was going to be any use, so that one went out the window. Obviously, the phoenix rising from the ashes, there were lots of suggestions about that. There was somebody who at the time thought it was a really strong idea to call it mutiny. And that was quite popular on the forums. A lot of people seemed to like that one. And then, of course, we had the language ideas. Can we do something with languages? So that was give it a try. So there were, I'm not sure how many posts there are on the forum for that thread, but I think it's maybe like 500, suggesting different names, giving us some ideas and things that we could do. So in the end, we managed to come up with a short list of 3. And on that short list, the first one was ZEGRIS. Now, ZEGRIS is a butterfly. So it's a beautiful thing that grows out of a grubby little slug. So we thought that was quite a cute idea. And it has orange-tipped wings. So, of course, Mambo was orange. So that was quite popular. Fortunately, some people thought it sounded like a Russian submarine. That's a battleship, but I couldn't find a submarine. So you thought it sounded a bit like this Russian thing. And this one was quite popular. I forget who suggested this one, PRIMARYKEY. It's a bit of a joke on the MySQL keys in the index. That was popular for a while. And then Joomla. Now, Joomla was, the original word spelling was J-U-M-L-A. This was found by Jean-Marie Simonet, who you might recognize on the forums and things as infograph. It's a Swahili word, which, as we hopefully all know now, means altogether. But how did he find it? What was he doing to look in Swahili? In fact, of all the languages that we were really proud of offering in Mambo at the time, Swahili wasn't one of them. So why were we looking at Swahili? Well, one of the original ideas was, hey, we want to make all this thing about language. What is the global language? And it's not English and it's not Dutch. It's Esperanto. So I can remember sitting there in the IRC chat room with Jean-Marie and a few others with an Esperanto dictionary. Has anybody ever looked at Esperanto? Yeah. It is the world's ugliest language. It's no wonder we don't speak Esperanto. Yeah, it really is ugly. So after about a few hours of going through a dictionary, looking at words, we rejected that one. And Ubuntu, which is the Linux distribution, was fairly new. Ubuntu is a Swahili word for means, I forget now, I think it's for doing good or something like that. Sorry?
Something like karma.
Yeah. And so we looked in the Swahili dictionary, and we went through the A's and the B's and the C's and the D's, and we got to J, and Jean-Marie goes, Joomla. It means altogether. Yeah, that's quite nice. And we couldn't be bothered going through the K's and the L's and the M's. So Joomla became option number 3. So how are we now going to decide? Well, these days on the community, on the Joomla community, there's a lot of talk about we, the community, want to vote for the name, for a decision. We want to have our voice. Well, Joomla today is huge. Yeah, had a couple of 100,000 people registered on the forum, 10 million websites. But in those days, what was then the Open Source Matters forum had 5,000 approximate members. Now, actually, all 5,000, that was straight away. So all 5,000 of those were active users immediately. If we'd have allowed 5,000 people to vote on these 3 names, it would have taken forever. And so we just said, in our arrogance, and we know best, we'll have a vote. Just the 22 of us on the team. So we set up a vote, and we used a private part of the forum to do the voting. And the voting would last until 1800 GMT, BST, UTC, whatever it was. And everybody voted. And unfortunately, 2 of us could see the results as they were happening, but not everybody else. It got to a point, I think, so it's supposed to finish at 6, and I think at 4, one of us had a look at the votes currently, and even though 5 people hadn't voted yet, there was one clear winner. And so he came straight onto our IRC chat and said, yay, we have a name. And I went, we've got 2 hours left. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it doesn't matter what they think, this name has won. And I went, you can't do that. And I really, if anyone's seen me get angry, there was steam flying off my keyboard. I was really angry. My vote had already been in. And as it happens, the one I voted for was going to be the winner. But okay, so these 4 other people hadn't had their opportunity to vote. And I really objected to the concept that your vote doesn't matter just because you live on the west coast of America. And so we argued again. And there was tears. Probably mainly from me. And so we decided, again, to reject the voting principle. So what were we going to do to solve this? Well, one of the core team members at the time was an Australian guy called Peter Russell, who at some point in his past had been the PR guy for the one section of the Sydney Olympics. And he had lots of contacts. And what he offered was, he said, guys, I know a brand consultancy company in Miami, Florida, that do work for Disney. Why don't I send them the 3 names? They'll make a decision, they'll do focus groups, and they'll make a decision, and we can go with that. But there's one condition, that whatever their decision is, we go with it. Well, we were all so sick and tired of arguing. We just said, please, whatever they do, they can do it. So Pete went away, sent the email to his friends in Miami, Florida, and this is what they came back with. Joomla with the bang at the end. JOOMLA'. Now, I was a good friend of Pete. I don't believe he ever went to a brand consultancy in Florida. I was talking to Johan earlier. Johan's a good friend of Peter. Johan doesn't believe he went to a brand consultancy. I've asked Peter recently, Peter, come on, it's 5 years ago. Did you go to a brand consultancy in America? Yes, Brian. Peter, it's me you're talking to. Did you go to a brand consultancy in America? Yes, Brian. Peter, come on. You know, yes, Brian. Okay, move along. So that's where we came from, Joomla with a bang. Now, the first reaction to that came from Mitch Pirtle, who's nicely been careful of the steps here, nicely been photoshopped in the middle, who said, I can't go to big business on Wall Street and say, I've got this CMS called Joomla, I'm going to sound like an Oompa Loompa from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And we listened to Mitch, and we laughed at Mitch, and we still weren't with Joomla because we really couldn't care anymore. We'd really had enough. And we just didn't want to argue. You know, we were doing so much. Just to give you an idea of how much work was going on at those times, I would get up at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'd switch on my computer, and I'd open the IRC, and it would take me an hour to read the previous 5 hours worth of IRC chats when I'd been asleep. And then I would be sat there in the chat room till 2, 3 in the morning, constant, lots of things we had to deal with. Some we made mistakes with, some we got right. We didn't really know what we were doing. No one had really taken a project before and split it and become something new. So there was no one to go to for advice. So there were some things that when someone said, this is your name, this is really good, we know what we're talking about, we just said, yeah, go with it. So that's where we came from. So on September the 1st, 2005, we sent an email to everybody that owned a domain name with the word Mambo in and said, guys, this is our new name, Joomla. Please keep it secret for the next hour. We're just telling you now so that you can have first chance to register the Joomla version of your domain. So there was a template club called a template site called Mambo Shack. You guys can go and register Joomla Shack. But please just register the Joomla equivalent of your Mambo name. And in most cases, it worked. Yeah, there were 1 or 2 little exceptions and a few little arguments, but they got solved quite quickly. But we let people go and register their names in advance. Everybody else had to wait till 1800. And we were watching the forums and the forum numbers online going up and up and up. Whilst we're waiting, it was quite exciting, you know. We were sort of sitting there going, oh, you know, I wonder what people are going to think. You know, this is really good. Somebody took, Arno Zylstra from Holland, took this screenshot of Google search for Joomla. And as you can see, there were 4 hits. Now, I don't know exactly how many there are today, but it's a lot more than 4. You can tell how technology was different back in 2005. This is our IRC chat room, and this is a photograph. Arno's wife held the camera up to the screen and took a photo. Yeah. I don't know why he didn't think of a screenshot, but he took a photo. And this is us waiting. Can I press the button? Please, can we say it? Can we make it live? And in the end, 1,800 came, and we made the name announced. And I had the honor of posting on the forum, guys, our name is Joomla. Yay! Success! A new baby was born. Obviously, there were people who didn't like the name. And you know what? We didn't care. We really didn't care. There'd been so many tears, so many arguments. And after all, it's only a name for a little CMS. What does it matter? How wrong we were. Before I finish, there's just a couple of lessons from choosing a name for a project or for a company, especially if you want it to be international. There's some things we forgot. If the word has a meaning, make sure that the meaning is a good meaning in all languages. We were lucky with Joomla because Joomla turned out to have a meaning in Arabic and one other language, and they were nice. I think one of them means dancing, or dancing as a group. But we were lucky with that. The other thing to do is make sure you can pronounce it in every language, which we forgot because the letter J doesn't exist in Spanish, Hebrew, or Arabic. So for them, it's Joomla. We forgot that. But you learn. You make mistakes and you learn and you don't do them again. But the best thing we did was making it unique. Because we know now that every time you search for the word Joomla, it's talking about Joomla, the open source CMS. Whereas before, when we searched for Mambo, we got Mambo, the clothing company, Mambo number 5, the dance. So it does mean that it is a unique search. So definitely, if you need to give yourself a name, go for something that's unique. Some people don't like the idea of going to Swahili for a language. You'll notice a lot of Joomla extensions now are using Swahili. Joomla Pack is now called Akiba, which means backup. There's a photo gallery that's about to be released called Percha, which again is Swahili for picture gallery. It's quite nice, it's quite funky once for Ubuntu. We got away with it twice for Joomla. You're running out of options. Maybe try and find another language. I hear some of the Eskimo languages have some good creative names, so maybe look in those. But it was definitely challenging times trying to choose a name. We knew that whatever name we chose would be controversial to some people. I think the summary at the end of the first day from the forum was, "This name sucks." That was the polite version. There were some people who were definitely not quite as polite on the forums. But 5 years later, Joomla's on 10 million websites, and it really seems to have been a success.